Hello and welcome to this day in history for January 6th. January 6th is the 6th day of the year in the Gregorian calendar, with 359 days remaining until the end of the year in most years. But since this is a leap year, there's 360 days remaining this year. Today's word is squiggle. Squiggle is a blended word referring to an irregularly curling or looping line, string, etc. To make an irregularly curling or looping line, to squirm or wriggle, to scribble. And we think it's a blend of the words squirm and wriggle. Earliest documented use of this word is 1804. Before we get started, I want to mention that links to my research are included in the show notes. So if you're wondering where I got this or that, you can find all the links right there in the show notes. And with that, we're going to start in the year 1066, when Harold II was crowned King of England following the death of Edward the Confessor. On his deathbed, Edward supposedly designated Harold as the royal heir, but of course there were others who had designs on that position, so he didn't get to keep that job for very long, but on this day he was crowned. On this day in 1412, Joan of Arc was born. She lived only 19 years, but she would become a Roman Catholic saint and a national hero for France. January 6th is a wedding anniversary for two presidents, George Washington and George H.W. Bush. In 1759, a 26-year-old George Washington married Martha Dandridge Custis, and we'll mention the Bushes in a little bit. In 1777, George Washington set up winter quarters in Morristown, New Jersey. On January 6th of 1798, frontiersman and trapper Jedediah Smith was born in Bainbridge, New York. I've been to Bainbridge on purpose. Jedediah lived through dozens of narrow escapes on his intrepid journeys and decided to retire from this dangerous trade in 1830 and enter the mercantile business. Ironically, being a trader proved more deadly than exploring. While leading a trading caravan along the Santa Fe Trail in 1831, Smith was killed by Comanche Indians near the Cimarron River. He was 32 years old. On January 6 of 1838, Samuel Morse's telegraph system was demonstrated for the first time at the Speedwell Iron Works in Morristown, New Jersey. The telegraph, as you may know, is a device which uses electric impulses to transmit encoded messages over a wire, and this would eventually revolutionize long-distance communication, reaching the height of its popularity in the 1920s and 30s. On January 6th of 1912, New Mexico was admitted into the United States as the 47th state. In 1919, Theodore Roosevelt died. He was the 26th president of the United States. He died at Sagamore Hill, his estate overlooking New York's Long Island Sound. He was a dynamic and energetic politician. Theodore Roosevelt is credited with creating the modern presidency. On this date in 1941, Franklin D. Roosevelt, hoping to move Congress from a position of neutrality and rally public support for the United States to take a stronger interventionist role, insisted that people in all nations of the world shared Americans' entitlement to four freedoms: the freedom of speech and expression, the freedom to worship God in his own way, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. In 1942, FDR announced to Congress that he would authorize the largest armaments production in the history of the United States. The first year of supercharged production schedule would result in 45,000 aircraft, 45,000 tanks, 20,000 anti-aircraft guns, and 8 million tons in new ships. Congressmen were stunned at the proposal, but Roosevelt was undeterred. These figures and similar figures for a multitude of other implements of war would give the Japanese and Nazis a little idea of just what they have accomplished. On this date in 1945, George Herbert Walker Bush, already a decorated World War II hero, married his 18-year-old sweetheart, Barbara Pierce. On this date in 1971, the Army dropped charges of an alleged cover-up in the My Lai massacre against 4 officers. After these charges were dropped, a total of 11 people had been cleared of responsibility during the My Lai trials. These trials were the result of an action that had occurred in March of 1968 when a massacre of Vietnamese civilians, including women and children, in a cluster of hamlets had taken place. Of those charged, only Lieutenant William Calley was convicted, but many believed that he was a scapegoat, and the widespread public outcry against his life sentence moved President Nixon to intervene on April 3rd of 1971. He had Calley removed from the Fort Benning stockade and ordered him confined to quarters pending a review of his case. In August, Calley's life term would be reduced to 20 years, and in November of 1974, a federal court judge ruled that Calley had been convicted unjustly, citing prejudicial publicity. Although the Army disputed this ruling, Calley was paroled for good behavior after serving 40 months, 35 of which were spent in his own home. 1975, Wheel of Fortune, the longest-running syndicated game show in American television, premiered on NBC. Created by television legend Merv Griffin and hosted since the early 1980s by Pat Sajak and Vanna White, Wheel is one of the most popular television shows in the world. In 1994, Tonya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan were ice skaters, both vying for a place on the U.S. Olympic figure skating team. Tonya's ex-husband hired a couple of thugs to injure Nancy so that she couldn't skate, giving Tonya a chance to get on that Olympic team. On January 6, 1994, one of the thugs did indeed injure Nancy Kerrigan so that she was unable to skate, and Tonya won the competition and a place at the 1994 Olympics. It's a real trailer trash soap opera. No kidding. The thugs confessed. Tonya insisted she knew nothing about the attack, but her ex insisted she did. The Olympic Committee sought to disqualify Tonya, but she sued and got to go to the Olympics after all, with Nancy, who had recovered enough to go herself by then. Tonya and Nancy, both on the Olympic skating team. Well, Tonya had some issues at the Olympic competition and finished 8th. Nancy came in with silver medal, although many of her fans felt she should have gotten the gold. In any case, whether Tonya actually knew anything about the plot to injure Nancy or not, Nancy still came out ahead and Tonya came out looking awkward and foolish, to put it kindly. Just don't do stuff like that. January 6th of 1996, oh my goodness, a big old blizzard up in the Northeast. Snow began falling in Washington, D.C., and up the eastern seaboard, beginning a blizzard that killed 154 people and caused over $1 billion in damages before it ended. Churches, barns, commercial buildings with flat roofs caved in from the snow load. Stores ran out of food and couldn't get more shipped in. The federal government in Washington, D.C. had to shut down for about a week. On January 6 of 2001, after a bitterly contested election, Vice President Al Gore presided over a joint session of Congress that certified George W. Bush as the winner of the 2000 election. In one of the closest presidential elections in U.S. history, George W. Bush was finally declared the winner more than 5 weeks after the election due to the disputed Florida ballots and their hanging chads. I don't know if they've got that straightened out yet or not. Anyway, I think that's going to do it for us today. As always, links to my research are included in the show notes. Thanks for watching. Give it a like if you enjoyed this video. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and feel free to share if you found this video interesting or informative. While you're on the interwebs watching videos, check out my other channel, 8 Susquehanna. There's a link in the show notes to that. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. There's a little birdie on my front porch. Barking dog. Well, figure it out in editing. Some things just can't be done. Alrighty. Back to work. Okie dokie, Smokey. That's a lot of words. I'm gonna have to look at that. Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? She's not a man. See, this is what happens when we're not scripted. Anyway, this is a pretty amazing app, and I'm experimenting with it a little bit. And I'm going to stop recording now and see what it looks like. This is why I don't do live shows.